Celeste Oliver is a spiritualist psychic medium, and she specializes in psychometry as well as readings from photographs. She also excels at remote viewing, and she discovered in 2010, thanks to the fantastic teaching of South African psychic medium Lee Van Zyl of the Montclair Psychic School, that she too can make contact with the past. Her great-great-aunts were the famous Fox sisters, the founders of modern spiritualism, and they paved the way for legitimate psychic mediums such as Celeste to comfort the grieving, educate the skeptical, and prove that energy is never destroyed. It really just changes form. Now, the story of Leah, Maggie and Kate Fox and the Fox family is an historic yet tragic one. It's also a very interesting part of American history. Celeste feels that her purpose is to carry on the energy that they started by giving honest readings to those truly interested in what lies beyond our fingertips. She also wishes to pay homage to these remarkable women who accidentally discovered that they could communicate with the deceased rather, and prove that the soul does indeed live on. If you would like more information about Celeste, please visit her website. It's celesteoliver-thepsychicfox.com. Well, Celeste, welcome to our show.
Hey, Steve. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you back with us, Celeste. We're very excited that you're joining us again, and we're extremely interested to hear all about Spirit Orbs.
Well, I'm just as excited to speak about them since there's something that I found to be quite addicting once I started taking pictures of them.
I actually have a neighbor
I appreciate you having me back on again. I know it's been a couple of years, and I enjoyed it so much before, so it's nice to be speaking with you, dear.
It's great to have you with us again, Celeste. We're really pleased, and we're interested to ask you all about Spirit Orbs. Can I ask you, first of all, what a Spirit Orb is?
Well, to me, a Spirit Orb is, as you said in the intro, energy which has changed. When someone has passed, the energy that is their soul, their spirit, leaves their body, and I always give the analogy of a sock puppet. You know, you put your hand inside a sock puppet, and suddenly it becomes animated and has that energy, and people talk to it and relate to it. But when you pull your hand out of the sock puppet and it lays there on the table, it's like your body after you pass. Your energy has gone elsewhere, you know, but the body or the sock puppet just lays limp. So I liken it to the energy having left the body and gone into what seems to be the easiest form to take, which is a sphere. You know, you look at so many things in nature, in the universe, they're the form of a circle or sphere. So I feel that that energy then coalesces into that and just carries on. And I have what I believe to be proof of when my dear mother passed last October. That afternoon I came home and there's this great big orb here in the kitchen, the lights of which I'd never seen before. And I knew it was her. I just felt calm, that I just knew she was still with me. So her energy changed from what it was in the hospital to now something new and free and just excited to be free of her body, and here it was still with me.
I think that at the end of life, when we're in physical decline, it must be a relief to leave the body.
Oh, definitely. And she was aware of that, and I made her aware of what would happen. That morning, I actually put on some nature sounds on the cell phone and put it on the pillow and opened up her chakras. I closed down her root chakra. I said, you don't need it anymore. You don't need to be tied to the earth. You know, and I went through what the other ones did for her in her lifetime, and I opened up her crown chakra, and I said, this is how you're going to leave. You're going to go out through here, and it's okay. You know, you're free to go. Just wait till my brother gets there, but, you know, and a couple hours later, she was gone. But I felt that immediately the energy in the room changed, that it almost got lighter because she was free of the burdens of a body which no longer worked for her.
It's wonderful. It's a great story. Well, going back to the Spirit Orbs, Celeste,
Yes.
I'm interested to ask you whether they're related to ectoplasm or other manifestations of spirit.
Well, what I've been learning is that everything in the universe is energy. We've all been created from energy, call it the Big Bang, whatever. Everything is energy in one form or another. Ectoplasm is its own kind of energy. A spirit orb, to me, is very closely related to ectoplasm. And I really kind of look at the two almost being, like siblings in a family.
Okay, and do you know why they permit themselves to be photographed? Is it their way of reaching out to us, of showing us that they are present?
In many cases, like when I was saying, when I got home from the hospital and I just got, this little voice of, get the camera, take some pictures. And I said, it's this large, gorgeous orb. And the same type had shown up for several months afterwards, and I always felt it was her. And it seems that when you take photographs with the intention of wanting to photograph an orb, if someone is in the vicinity, they will show up. Another example is Christmas Eve. When I came home from church, I looked at the photo on the china cabinet. I have a page on my website of orb photos, and I have it there where I'm saying, okay, Mom, it's not the same without you, but I know you're here. Merry Christmas. And I started taking pictures, and there is this great big orb over her photograph on Christmas Eve. The next morning, I said, well, Merry Christmas. Something again told me to aim the camera towards my front door, and then I got a nice streak in motion, which I felt was her responding to my wanting to, greet her. So when you have the intention, I do believe that they're more likely to be there, especially with someone you know. But I have gone to different venues just with the intention of seeing whatever shows up. And sometimes it's quite surprising, that I will find an orb over one person in a crowd or, in a historic building. They're good for a lot of them, too.
Are they always benevolent, Celeste?
I'm sorry?
Are they always benevolent, or can harmful spirits manifest as orbs?
If you talk about harmful spirits, I have the books by Dr. Michael Newton, which I found really helpful to my mediumship and really quite enlightening. And this guy should give me a commission because I have told more people about his books. I've bought about 9 or 10 of them now and given them all away. I finally have a copy here, which I swear is going to be for myself. And he says that we all, when we are created as spirit, have the choice, when someone talks about a malevolent spirit, yes, some spirits do have the choice to not be quite so nice to others on Earth or, in their realm, but will they harm you? No, because everything is created with love. The however you want to speak of God, the source, he who made all, everything is created with love. So the whole idea, according to what Dr. Newton has found, is that having a, quote, malevolent spirit doesn't really quite jive because they're all really with that love energy initially, and they cannot harm you. Humans have been programmed to think of things in terms of good and evil, and I believe it's a lot of programming through the years of various religions to, in a way, have control over the masses, just to scare somebody to follow their line. People nowadays are becoming more aware of the choice and being more open to expanding their knowledge of metaphysics, of the universe, of things that we didn't dare mention, 100 years ago. And that's why the Fox sisters were so controversial, because they brought up again in an age of open communication something that people for many years were afraid to mention. Otherwise they would have been burned at the stake.
Well, can you tell us, Celeste, about some tips or the best way of sighting spirit orbs for our listeners that want to actually see some orbs?
Well, oddly enough, the less expensive a digital camera that you have, the more you're going to capture orbs. It seems that the more expensive, more sophisticated cameras are programmed to filter out dust and things like orbs. They don't capture them as well. A friend of mine, before he moved last year, gave me this little Casio. It's a very slimline type of camera, nothing really expensive. And I get all kinds of orbs on this thing. I bought myself a $300 Nikon a few months ago, and it hardly gets anything. So I just use the little Casio, which maybe cost Dave $100, and I get them like crazy. So you don't need high-tech equipment, but a digital camera is more useful than, now you can't even use film anymore. But people were noticing when digitals became so popular that they were capturing more orbs with them. I just find that, again, having the intention or going to a place that has spirit activity seems to help a lot. Although a year or so ago, I was outside photographing the full moon on Halloween, and when I got in and put the chip into the computer and looked, there's an orb outdoors by the pine tree, so they can be anywhere.
And is there a better time of day to capture orbs?
Well, nighttime seems to be easier. I liken it to where people say that the veil between the planes gets thinner, later at night. Although I have taken some during the day, but I tend to, get more in the evening. I do notice that. That's when I start to think about taking them too. You get busy doing other things during the day, but if you're on a tour somewhere and it's daytime and you're in a building and, it's historic, there's a lot of energy there, you'll get something.
And do they prefer a certain type of geography or environment?
I don't think so. Like I said, I found one that was outdoors, on Halloween out in my yard. I've gotten them all kinds of places. One thing that I do believe with orbs, as well as, with spirit in general, what I learned is because of the energy that's used by spirit to manifest. When I'm doing a reading, I tend to get goosebumps and tingles, and they're drawing that energy from me. It's like where people say, walk into a room and you get this cold blast. Well, they're taking heat from you, your energy, to help manifest. And it just seems that they like to be around more energy. You're not going to find too much in a graveyard because there's no energy going on there. You're going to find it at, sports games, bars, crowded bars, places where there are a lot of people and there's thus a lot of energy.
So they are in effect using or drawing from the energy of humans to manifest themselves.
In many ways. Now, where I had worked previously, there was a lot of energy around the lights way up in the ceiling. It used to be the old steel mill in my area here. So you had these large incandescent lights up in the ceiling, and there were times in the one bay that I would go, say, on my lunch break and just start taking pictures, and I would find a lot up by the lights or by the electrical control panels. So I believe that, they like to hang near where there is definite energy. But like I said, I have found, too, that they can really come anywhere. But, it makes more sense that you're going to find them more in a crowd. There was a going-away party. Speaking of bars, there was a going-away party for someone from work, and I went and took pictures and was shocked a few days later when I got back into the office and popped the chip into the computer how many orbs there were around the person who was leaving and others in the bar. And all I was doing was taking in photos of a goodbye party. I didn't even have the intention of trying to catch any orbs, but they showed up there.
Well, can we tell from the orbs some of the characteristics of the spirit or person that it represents?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because according to Dr. Michael Newton's books, a spirit, when we're created newly, is white, starts out white. And then it goes to yellow and pink and, shades of light blue and, darker as they evolve more, as spirits, grow, okay? So a newbie is white. Someone very advanced is like a deep violet. And it's kind of like your chakras. As you move up in the human chakras, as you become more enlightened, then they go from blue for your throat and indigo for your third eye and violet for the crown and beyond. But the energy that, they have does reflect on the personality, I believe, from before. A person, however, could be really an old soul and a very advanced spirit, but could have chosen to live a life where, for their own soul lessons, might not be what we would consider exciting or glamorous or whatever. They could be in poverty, they could be ill or have, a physical problem, but that's for their soul advancement. So initially we might not think of them as, departing and having this really bright light, but they could be someone that's going to show up as one of the photos I have on my orb page. Someone actually sent to me, she photographed this gorgeous deep blue orb in Louisiana. And I wrote back to her and I said, well, I feel that's a very advanced soul. And then when I was at Casadega Spiritualist Camp in Florida in January, in this one hotel, I was taking pictures downstairs in the restaurant area. It was empty. And I got a beautiful violet orb on a table. So to me, those spirit orbs are souls that are, say, more advanced, older, than one that might be a more, say, yellow, or orange. And I have gotten those as well.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of different coloured orbs.
I'm sorry, dear.
I hadn't heard of different coloured orbs, actually. I'd only heard of white and sort of the more yellow and golden coloured orbs. I didn't realise that they can appear in colour of indigo and blue, etc.
Yeah, well, like I said, on my orb page, I do have, the examples of the different colors. And what struck me from when my mom passed, not only was it so much larger than anything else I've gotten in the house before, but it was a beautiful shades of blue with like an orange halo around it. And it seems to always be accompanied by a smaller one, which is an even brighter blue, and again has different colors to it, which I believe is my cousin Virginia, who passed 17 years ago. So, yeah, they're not just white, because a lot of people will say, well, that's just dust, and I have come across people, couple in my own family who say, oh, that's just dust. I'm like, no, it's not. After a while, you can tell if it's moisture, humidity, or dust. And when you get something that I call the streak, or it goes like whoosh, that's not dust. Dust doesn't move like that. And again, I have some examples on my webpage.
I'll have to take a look at your webpage, Celeste, and see some of those photographs. You mentioned dust and people that that are skeptical and might say, well, this is dust, not an orb. What would you say to skeptics about spirit orbs?
Well, there are people that, there's an old saying, I believe it goes, there are none so blind as those who will not see. Now, in this day and age, so much has been revealed to us, and to just discount everything, that goes, back 500 years to, the earth was flat, and, don't you dare say otherwise. I just don't understand. Maybe it's a fear of thinking that there is something beyond that we can't control, because once someone has gone off into spirit energy, you can't control them or do anything to them or communicate with them like you could before. Maybe that's part of it. There are just some people. Now, I did a gallery at the local VFW a few months ago, and I knew ahead of time there were going to be two women, two friends that were going to come, and one had short blonde hair, and sure enough, there were the two of them, that were friends, and the woman at the end was sitting there tighter than a crab's ass. She had her hands and her arms folded, her legs were crossed, and I said, you're not really into this, are you? She goes, nope, I don't believe any of it. When you're dead, you're dead. I'm like, well, it's not my job to convince you otherwise, but I do ask that you be objective. And if something belongs to you that I say, please be honest enough to own it. Wouldn't you know, half of what came through was for her. And I took pictures, and orbs that I got that day were mostly around her. But she didn't want to believe it for whatever reason. And it's not my job to convince people. They need to learn for themselves.
I remember once doing a demonstration of mediumship, and there was a gentleman there with his wife, and she'd obviously encouraged him to come along. She was interested, and he was completely skeptical, but he ended up in tears because his father and his mother came through really accurately. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful to prove a skeptic that there is much more to life than one might think. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your family, if you don't mind, Celeste.
Sure. No problem.
Because I obviously know of the Fox sisters. I think everybody that has studied spiritualism or that's interested in spiritualism knows the story of the Fox sisters. But you mentioned talking with members of your family and somebody being skeptical. And that intrigued me because of the history, the background of in your family of the Fox sisters. Do most members of your family thoroughly understand what occurred with the Fox sisters, or are some of them just disinterested?
No, my cousins, are well aware of the family history, but, one cousin just totally dismisses it. Another one actually came to me when I first started all this to a practice circle in New York years ago. We were sitting in the back corner, and the teacher, Lee Van Zyl of Montclair Metaphysical School, she's great, and I learned a lot from her. She had an exercise going where we were to, sit next to her in the front and facing everybody else, just start giving a reading. Well, for about 20 minutes, someone else had gone up there, and I keep hearing in my head, biscuits. Biscuits? Whatever the heck that means. So then she looked at me and said, all right, you come up here, and sit down, because I always seem to, every week, hit on getting somebody. So I sat down and I said, I just have to say before I start that I just kept hearing the word biscuits in my head for 20 minutes. And she goes, oh, I can take that. Yesterday at the center, it was so busy, all I did was eat biscuits all day. She's from South Africa, and like the British, you call cookies biscuits. So then I got in her uncle and started describing him in relation to, where she lived on a game ranch in South Africa. And he raced cars and what he looked like. And I got in her uncle. There was an uncle the whole time saying biscuits in my head. Well, my cousin was sitting back there looking like, oh my God, I guess she was expecting my head to start twirling around. I don't know. But she didn't really know what to make of it on our way back to the train station. Yeah, she was like, there's something going on here. I don't know if I can own it or accept all of it, but I sure as heck saw it. So like I said, it's not my job to convince anybody. They need to learn for themselves. I do have other relatives that are totally in agreement with, my mediumship, my interest in the paranormal and metaphysical and spiritual world. And for the most part, I would say that's most of the family.
Well, talking of family, Celeste, can you explain to our listeners who the Fox sisters were or are?
Well, they were my great-great-aunts on my father's mother's side. Dad's mom, her maiden name was Fox, Elizabeth Fox. Her father was Benjamin Franklin Calvin Fox, and his father was David Fox, who was the only brother of the sisters. Now, on Dad's side of the family, they tend to live well into their 90s. And, so generations are really spread out where you still had people being born, 20 years later after the first one was. So, going back to 1820 when David was born, considering he's a great-great-grandfather, you might think that there would be more greats in there, but no. It was my great-great-grandfather on Dad's side. But it's funny, the family was Methodist. Their father, John Fox, was a staunch Methodist once he kind of cleaned up his act and went back to the family after being away for 10 years on and off. And that's when he and Margaret had Kate and Maggie. And my grandmother was Methodist, and my great-aunt Florence, her youngest sister, was Methodist. And when I went to visit Florence in Seattle one time, she was 93 then. And I started getting a renewed interest in the Fox sisters. I mean, this was over 20 years ago. And I said, hey, Florence, what can you tell me about the Fox sisters? And I got the hand in my face, and no, we don't talk about them. No, that's it. No, don't bring it up. And that was it. She shut me down. So as soon as I got back east, I had to go looking up more. My aunt that passed last year, when I asked her a couple of years ago if she remembers what she heard growing up, she didn't want to talk about them. They were the family scandal, because of what happened at the end with Maggie disavowing everything. And then a year later, recanting that. So it looked like they were cuckoo, honestly. But there's a book by an in-law, Miriam Buckner Pond, called The Unfortunate Fox Family. Time is Kind, the story of the unfortunate Fox family. And she had actually interviewed relatives early in the 1900s and seen letters. And she wrote a very comprehensive book of the family history. And that is what I really go to for more accurate information. People will find something on Wikipedia, which is, half the time just anyone can put anything on Wikipedia, and everybody knows what I call the Cliff Notes version. But there's a lot more to it. And as you said in the intro, they really were a large part of American history for over 40 years. They knew everybody who was famous in the United States and in Europe. And they really, in many ways, are very well respected for starting something that actually had been around for thousands of years. But because of increased communication with telegraphs and newspapers and the Erie Canal having been built, the word just spread so quickly when everything started with them and just continued from there.
Well, can you tell us or explain to us, Celeste, why the Fox sisters were famous? What actually happened that caused them to become so talked about?
Well, there was a cottage that they were renting. The father was renting while he was having a new house built 2 miles away by David's farm. Now, David's farm had also been in the family. He had bought some property from a relative, and then John Fox was going to have a new home there. Well, he was also a blacksmith, and there was a smithy outside of this cottage on the corner of Hydesville Road in this little hamlet, which still is a little hamlet of Hydesville, New York, near Newark, New York. And other people who had lived there left after hearing strange noises. And things were rather quiet. They moved in December of 1847, but by March of 1848, the knocks and rappings became so loud and so disruptive. I mean, they were practically ill from the lack of sleep. And at one point then, Kate says, well, do like I do. And she knocks 3 times, and then she hears in response, and it's like, oh my God, it can hear us. Well, then she made like she was going to snap her fingers, however many times, and then it still responded to how many times she meant, was going to do that. And she says, oh, Mother, look, it can see us as well as hear us. Well, then their mother, who actually all the psychic ability comes from Margaret Smith Fox's side of the family, and she devised a way of communicating later using the alphabet, but she would say, all right, is this a spirit, an injured spirit? And it would be like 1 for yes, 2 for no, And she asked how many children she had. Well, she had given birth to 7. The very first one died in infancy, but she had 6 living. Well, it rapped out 7 raps, which was correct. Then they got in neighbors from across the street who would ask questions. Well, how many children do I have? What are their ages? And it would get accurate answers. Well, it seems that before they rented, there was a family or a couple that had a peddler stop by. And back in those days, the wandering peddler would sell things like sewing notions to women, fabrics and lace and thimbles and such. And they seemed to know this guy and told their live-in maid, oh, we don't need you anymore. You can go home to your mother. And then
Celeste,
a few days later, they told her to come back. And,
Celeste,
can you make a new coat? Because we have this fabric here. Well, she never saw the peddler, whose name they ascertained to be Charles Rosna.
Celeste, can we pause just one moment there with the peddler? Because we need to take a short commercial break. And I was thinking this would be a great moment to pause and take that break. And then talk about the peddler when we come back. Because obviously he's a very important part of the story.
Yeah, it started with him.
Okay, well, we'll take our break and we'll be back in just a moment.
All right.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at PsychicAccess.com.
Well, welcome back, Celeste. This is very, very interesting. Now, let me ask you, can you repeat the name of the peddler for us and then tell us more about him?
Well, they ascertained that his name was Charles B. Rosna. Rosna. Sometimes you see it written as Rosma, M-A. But no one seemed to be able to find record of anyone under either name in that area. But they do agree that after a certain date, he just disappeared off the face of the earth. Well, like I said, the girls were hearing these raps in response to questions, and it was then determined that he had been murdered in the East Room upstairs, and his $500 that he had with him was stolen. You know, the Bells knew that he would have money on him, of course, you know, traveling around as he did, and he was murdered for the $500 and buried in the basement. So everyone starts digging in the basement. David and other friends and relatives, you know, came by, and it seems that the house is near what you call a creek or a little stream, and there had been a lot of rains at that time, and the water table was high. Well, it seems that they did find a piece of skull with some red hair and another piece of a tooth, which actually David Fox kept until shortly before his death in 1902. And then he destroyed it. Why, I don't know. But they had to stop because of rising water. Well, many years later, even after everything that went on with Maggie and Kate and their alcoholism, but the father had been alcoholic, that's why he was gone for 10 years. And unfortunately, when the seances started, people would afterwards give them champagne or brandy. Well, they didn't know years ago about the genetic connection. And the poor girls, by the time they were in their early 20s, they were alcoholics. You know, I'll say it, they were. And a lot happened years later because of that, which didn't help things. It didn't diminish their mediumship by any means. But years later, down at the old house, there was a false wall in the basement, and a skeleton and a peddler's box was found there. And it kind of, you know, brought to light that, you know, they weren't making it all up. It wasn't all a fraud. They weren't just cracking toe joints, you know, in response to questions. I mean, you can crack your knuckles in your hand. The synovial fluid will make that pop, but it takes time for the pressure to build up again in order to crack your knuckle, you know. So this whole business about cracking toe joints and all to get these answers, again, I think was maybe a way of not taking full responsibility for opening up the side of spirit energy that people were afraid of years ago. You know, it was a handy excuse in many ways. So, again, I can see why they were the family scandal and very controversial among even my own relatives to this day. But I think that what they went through and death threats and attempts on their lives, it broke up the family because the mother acted as the chaperone and went with the girls everywhere, and the father stayed and did his blacksmithing business and stayed with David for the most part back at the farm until he was much older, and then he was with them, in fact, when he passed away. But in the end, it really broke up a family that had reunited. And what happened was, because their father, David, he was like a Sunday school teacher in his Methodist church. And in New York, one morning he was going to go to church with his son-in-law, and Leah, the oldest, had gotten the message to, you know, do the alphabet. And she wrote out a message saying about, you know, we're proud of you, son, we'll see you soon. And he took it to mean, you know, his parents, who had passed, of course, were going to be seeing him, that his time was close. And he came back from church and said that, you know, that meant more to me about living and being a spiritual being than what I got in church. You know, it proves to me more that life does live on. You know, what I tell people is, I say, well, you know, you believe in Easter? What Easter's all about? And they go, well, of course. I said, well, it's the same thing. Spirit living on. And then you see the wheels turning in their head. It just gets me every time. You know, because then they don't have a rebuttal for that. Because we are all spirit energy.
Yeah, I don't understand why people think that this is it, that you're born from nowhere, that you live a life, a conscious life, and then it's all just over. I don't think I could cope with life if I had that belief or paradigm, Celeste, don't you think?
I know, and I've been the same way. And even as a real little girl, I was always feeling that there was something beyond, that I had been around this block before. And I know it. You know, I do know it. And like I said with that one woman when I did the gallery at the VFW, who just sat there all twisted up like a pretzel and is saying, well, I don't believe in anything, and when you're dead, you're dead. But I didn't want to get into an argument with her in any way. I didn't want to say, well, you know, give her the whole "do you believe in Easter" thing, because I thought, yeah, you know what, whatever. Just don't put a damper on energy coming in for anyone else, all right? But if it belongs to you, just be honest enough to say so. And like I said, half of it was for her. And then I saw her friend a couple of weeks later, and I said, well, how's she doing? Did she believe in anything? She goes, that's the way she is. But I was impressed, and I reminded her about what you said about grandfather's farm and all. I said, well, you know, that's her reality. Everyone has the reality that they're comfortable with. And sometimes we move on with it and we expand our realities, and some people are afraid of the change. And that's their soul lesson while they're here.
Well, going back to the Fox sisters, Celeste,
Yeah.
my understanding is that they traveled around a lot demonstrating their mediumship, so they conducted a lot of seances.
Yes.
And you don't hear so much nowadays about seances and particularly physical mediumship. Do you have a view on why that is?
Well, I know at Lee's school in Montclair, they do physical mediumship. I know that one of the mediums I actually met a couple of years ago, Audrey Willey from Australia, she teaches physical mediumship. It is out there, you know, for whatever reason you don't hear so much of it, maybe because years ago, so a lot of it was really fraudulent, you know. I think under the right circumstances, something can be proven to be real with physical mediumship now. But again, it's like sometimes when you say something to someone that, you know, you're a psychic medium, they look at you like you have three heads. Because there are frauds out there, especially those who say, oh, I can remove a curse from you for another $100.
Oh, yes. I had a case the other day, Celeste. A lady contacted me and said, oh, can you give me your advice on whether this is reasonable? A psychic in Florida told me that I need to pay $30,000 to have a curse removed. And
I would
this is what gives spiritual people that are working in the metaphysical field a terrible name.
I know it does. And you have to, you know, really just be honest and real and do your thing and let someone decide on their own. I mean, the last large psychic fair that I did, I had 17 readings that day. It was the most I'd ever done in one day. I was exhausted. But I hit on every single one of them. And I just do what I had been taught. You know, you get, what do they look like, the relationship to the person, how did they pass away, what special thing can you share with the person, the sitter, so that they know, oh, yeah, well, this is my uncle because he used to, you know, eat donuts every Saturday morning or something. something that you wouldn't know. And that proves to them that, spirit energy is around. And I would tell them that, all right, I'm going to tell you something that you did in the last week or two. And I give a couple of examples as I get it in my head. And I never saw this person before. How would I know that? And I love it when I hear people say, how do you know that? I was like, it just came to me. They're telling me this. I see a picture in my mind's eye. I hear it. I just sense it. I just know it, But what you need to know is not so much how do I get it, but that it's there and they're with you, and that they care about you and they're always around and they've never really left you and they want you to know that. But it's the others that, like you said, trying to remove curses or demanding extra money. They're just out-and-out frauds.
So tell me,
something
Celeste.
unusual, if I could interject quickly. A couple of weeks ago now, I was coming back from Connecticut on the Amtrak, and in New York, the woman I was sitting next to left, and this young girl wanted to sit by me. I'm okay. Well, she was getting off at D.C., and I was getting off at Trenton. So I said, well, you sit by the window so I don't have to crawl over you later to get out. Well, after about 10 minutes, because I see she was texting on her phone, after about 10 minutes, I started getting the tingles and the goosebumps on the top of my head and the side of my face, and I'm thinking, well, whoever you are, you need to go to your family. I'm on the train now. I'm not really open for this. And she goes to put the phone to her ear, and I pointed out to her that we were in the quiet car. She put the phone down and buries her head in her hands and starts sobbing. I'm like, honey, what's the matter? What happened? She goes, I just learned my brother just died. I'm like, that's who was contacting me.
Mm-hmm.
I gave her my card. I said, look, feel free to get in touch, send me pictures, whatever. But I was telling her about orbs and taking pictures and knowing that her brother's energy has just changed. And, unfortunately, it happened. But I said, look, of all the people to sit next to on a train, you sit next to in the medium the moment you realize your brother just died. So strange things happen, and how can you say any of that was fraudulent?
It's very interesting. What's your strangest experience with spirit, Celeste?
Well, that was one of them. That's got to be near the top of the list. Are you asking, say, in regards to giving a reading or just my own actual experience?
Yes, in your own experience.
Well, one thing that was rather unusual was my late boyfriend. We had gone to Ireland together about 15 years ago. He went with a work crew a week earlier to repair an old monastery, northwestern Ireland, and I followed a week later. And the drinking song of the group was American Pie. So every pub we went to, everybody was always singing American Pie, and all the Irish knew all the words. So he passed away of septicemia 4 years ago now. And I took his childhood friend's mother in my car back to his mother's house. And then she was going to get, into her husband's car because my car was easier for her, with her physical limitations. Well, anyway, I had turned my radio down. I never turned it off, but I had turned it down so we could speak. And then after she left, I turned it up and go to hit this one particular button, and it was like you had disconnected the battery or the alternator. It got all weird. And I thought, oh, man, I have to reset all these buttons. And I finally decided on which one I wanted to hear. And wouldn't you know, I hear, bye, bye, Miss American Pie. And I'm like, they said you were a jokester. And it's like, that was him saying hi. He screwed up all my radio buttons. And then when I get it fixed, that song came on at that moment. And there were times when I would go to visit his gravesite and leave the cemetery. And as I approached the gates, I push a button and American Pie would come on.
That's a great story. Really wonderful story.
It's a little unusual.
Well, Celeste, now for our listeners that want to visit your website, can you just remind us of your website address and tell us what people can find there?
Well, as we said in the intro, I have it as Celeste Oliver the Psychic Fox. But if you go into Google and just put Celeste Oliver, it'll come up. You put the Psychic Fox, it'll come up. And I have an intro of how I'm related to the sisters, and also pages on further reading, such as like Dr. Newton's books. There was a book written by Barbara Weisberg who met with me while she was doing it, researching it, and she wrote They Talk to the Dead. And she was very objective about it. I really liked how it ended up. I felt that she was leaving it to the reader to decide for themselves what to think about the sisters. She wasn't steering anyone into any, mindset. But I also have a page about readings that I had done. People allowed me to put their readings up on the web. I either changed the names or left them out. Upcoming events, things are a little slow right now, and I've done it that way on purpose because I am working on my mother's house. My brother and I are going to be selling, so I've been busy with that. And the page on the orb photos, interviews, and I'll add you to the list later. And past events I've attended, and testimonials are, if you want a reading, page there, and also about Fox photos, some family photos and related sites, and how to get a free reading.
Excellent. Well, we'll be sure to check that out, Celeste, and it's been a real pleasure and honor to have you back on the show with us again.
Well, it's been great. I've been looking forward to it. I did want to say that besides working with the mediumship, I also am going to be giving public talks about my journey with breast cancer. And if anyone is interested in having me speak at any of their organizations, to get in touch with me through the Psychic Fox right now. I am working on the webpage for the breast cancer, but that's something where, too, I wonder what was my sole purpose and what was the reason why I got it, and now I figured it out.
Well, that sounds wonderful, Celeste. We're grateful for you joining us, and we'll certainly check out that webpage. Will that page be connected to your psychic website when it's complete?
I can link it, again, because of wondering, why did I get it, and the sole purpose behind it. So I will have a link there too later on.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Celeste, and we wish you all the best for 2014 and all of your projects.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed our first interview, and this has just been great. I thank you so much for having me again.
Our pleasure, Celeste. Thank you so much.
All right, take care now. Bye-bye.
You too. Goodbye.
Hello, my name is Rez Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 60-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers, get access, psychic access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.